Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome to spring, as you said. Now, I'm so pleased to bring our speaker today. This is Carol Tryon, and she was hired in the year 2000 by Human Options in Irvine, California, to research and develop a program for older, battered women and victims of elder abuse. I sound. I'll go up and down. Is that better? Okay, thank you. She's the founding coordinator of Safe Options for Seniors, a program to help seniors break the cycle of violence in their families. She regularly presents domestic elder abuse training for law enforcement, district attorneys, local domestic violence shelters, and senior social service associations. And she's got some really interesting information. I hope you'll enjoy this. I enjoy talking to her. Carol Tryon.
So I tend to walk and pace, gotta get my steps in and whatever. But I like to make sure I can see people's faces. So we're gonna talk about if you're at risk of elder abuse, and everybody in this room probably has their own idea of what elder abuse means. You may learn some new things, you may be startled by what you learn, you may be upset by what you learn, and you may have questions. And for the guys doing the video, we'll try to save those till the end, and if it's really urgent, we'll go ahead and try and answer as we go forward. So first we have to look at our aging nation to see why elder abuse is on the rise. And it's been on the rise for about 30 years. If you look at the topic, many of you probably heard of a population pyramid. So our population is usually wider at the bottom and narrower at the top because people are born and people die. Just that simple. However, if you look at the 2060 one, it's almost a rectangle. And there are more people born, less people born under the age of 18, and more people becoming over the age of 65. So we're having more older people available, less younger people to repopulate us. And that's very important. Because everything in this world is geared to people under the age of 18. If you look at the history of child abuse, we started working on child abuse in the 1960s. And here we are in 2024, and we still have child abuse. We have not solved the problem, right? If you look at domestic violence, we started recognizing that in the 70s and 80s. We haven't solved the problem. It's still here. If you look at elder abuse, we didn't even start recognizing it until the late 90s or early 2000s. Because who's going to hit grandma? And the problem is, there's more of us than there are everybody else. So we become the perfect target. In Nevada, the definition of elder abuse is exactly the same as the National Center on Elder Abuse. And it means that if you're being physically, emotionally, psychologically, financially exploited or neglected, that's against the law. Now, the problem is we don't have a national definition on elder abuse. So some states start at 55. Some states start at 60. Some states start at 65. Some states start at 70. Some states include those with disabilities. Some states only consider people elderly if they have a disability. So there's no national definition, and every state has to look at it separately. I also want to add, before I forget, in most states, you get more jail time for abusing your dog than you do abusing your grandma. And most elder abuse, domestic violence crimes go unreported. And we'll talk more about what that is. So I was so used to doing Orange County, California, but I looked up all the last year's stats for Clark County. So as you can see, there were 5,387. Since COVID, that number's gone down. Prior to COVID, it was in the 7,000s. And then during COVID, people weren't reporting. And people still aren't reporting. If you break it down by gender, you can see it's mostly more female. It's usually 2/3 female, 1/3 male. But the thing is, people assume that the people who are being abused live in nursing homes. Well, less than 10% of the United seniors live in a nursing home. So where do they live? They live at home. They live in the community. So it's more likely that people are being abused in their own residence than in a nursing home, assisted living, or anywhere else. And the own residence also includes apartments. And then we have the other group where it says unknown, and those are generally homeless seniors. And we know that the homeless senior population, because of just finances across the world, are growing across the world. And when we look at the breakdown by age, the majority of the seniors who are being abused are between the ages of 60 and 69, with the largest majority of them being between 75 and 84. And then there's also 1,000 people over 85. So when you look at it, there's a really big chance that you know somebody who's being abused. Who's abusing them? 48% are family members. And people are always startled by that. But if you're living in your own home, or you're living with your adult children or any other family member, who's the person who's going to abuse you? The person who you live with. When it says self, these are about seniors who can no longer take care of themselves. We have no problem as a community reporting to the police or to Adult Protective Services when we have a senior who we're worried about because they can't take care of something. They have dementia, they've hurt themselves, whatever. That's a good Samaritan on us, so we will report that. So that's why that number is so high. We're more afraid of reporting family members because we assume they didn't mean to do it. Caregiver staff, it's less than 10%. And again, we're all afraid of going into nursing homes. We're going to be abused in the nursing home, but very little happens there. But they do hire bad apples. There are bad actors everywhere. But they have a lot of good, and I'm new to Nevada, so I don't know a lot of the laws for Nevada nursing homes. They have some really good laws across the United States. Yeah. So then let's look at the breakdown on family. One of the issues is almost 40% are adult children. Now, the reason parents don't turn in their kids who are abusing them is they love our kids, right? How many people in here do not love their kids? I won't ask you to raise your hands. But, or their grandchildren. So if you mix together other relatives, which is generally grandchildren, sometimes siblings, and an adult child, it's over 50% of the abusers. And domestic violence still continues, even though somebody's turned 65. So if they've been in a DV relationship prior, there's a real good chance they're still in one. It just changes and it looks different. And we'll talk about what that looks like as we age. These are the type of abuses that were reported in Clark County last year. However, it doesn't add up to 100%. And it's never going to because the percentage it's usually more than one type of abuse going at any given time. Unless it's financial exploitation by a stranger. So, and that's about 21%. And then back to self-defense. Those are the people who can't take care of themselves for whatever reason, mental or physical incapacity. Neglect is another issue for people who are neglected by their family members. They don't buy them hearing aids, they don't pay for their food, they don't take appointments, they won't let them go to church. They pretty much made them prisoners in their own home. And then they neglect them by not doing what they're supposed to do. The most important part is for every one case that's abused, 20 years ago it was one, for every one, it was 5 that weren't reported. Now, for every one case that is reported, 24 are not reported. It's a lot. And why? Because there's more of us. And more of us don't understand what elder abuse is. So usually when we think of the elderly, this is what people come up with. Somebody frail, in a wheelchair, unable to take care of themselves, probably demented, right away. People are not as demented as they think they are. But the reality is, or people are not as demented as the public thinks. These are also faces of victims of elder abuse. And I want you to look at the bottom right-hand corner. Who do you see? Sean Connery. Victim or perpetrator of elder abuse? Which one is he?
Victim.
He's a perpetrator. This is what he said in 1963. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with hitting a woman. Although I don't recommend doing it in the same way you hit a man. An open hand slap is justified. If all other alternatives have failed, and there's been plenty of warning, you can hit your wife. If a woman is a bitch or hysterical or bloody-minded continually, then I'll do it. I think a man has a slight advantage ahead of a woman. 1963. He said that to Life magazine. He repeated himself in 1987 and said the exact same thing. Diane Sawyer interviewed him in 1993, and he said, what I really meant to say was that slapping a woman is not the crudest thing you can do to her. It's much more cruel to physiologically damage someone. Put them in distress when they really come to hate themselves. But sometimes you just have to hit them. Ultimately, they want that slap. In 2006, after being interviewed again at 60 Minutes, he said, my view, I don't believe there's any level of abuse against a woman is justified under any circumstance. Full stop. From 1963 to 2003, taking 40 years to come to that realization. The big reason is because we're a patriarchal society, and we've always considered women property. From the beginning of our country, women couldn't own anything. They were their husband's property. Their kids were their husband's property. That view didn't change. And it actually didn't change until the late 1980s, when we started doing away with laws where women had properties. I was telling Juanita yesterday when I got married, I went to JCPenney's, they offered me a credit card, and they said, oh, you're married, your husband has to sign for it. This is in the 70s. Juanita, who was single, didn't need a husband to sign for it. In the 80s, after having 2 kids, I'm like, I'm in. I'm on my shoe side, went to the doctor here in Utah, in Nevada. I got out in Dallas. He handed me a piece of paper and he said, have your husband sign this so we can do it. And you have to wait 30 days to make sure you don't make a mistake. So this was my first foray into feminism. When somebody started to tell me what I could do with my body. The doctor said, but don't tell anybody I told you this, but your husband can have you vasectomy tomorrow. I'm like, okay. Because he doesn't even have to tell you. He can do it without your consent. So we've always looked at women as property. Until the late 80s, early 90s, if a woman left her home out of domestic violence, she did what's called abandonment, almost lost all rights to her home if she was gone for 7 days. 50 states in the United States have that. That law no longer exists. Okay, so these are the type of abuses that we look at. Most victims will tell you they would much prefer sometimes, as he said, getting hit, because the psychological and the emotional abuse is so damaging. If you had somebody that was your mirror all day long who said to you, you're an idiot, you're a bitch, you're stupid, you're demented, and nobody else there to tell you differently, you start to believe that. And they say that ruins their self-esteem, it ruins their self-expectations. It really makes it hard for them to move forward. Whereas if somebody hits you, it's over and done. Sexual abuse, we have a lot of cases that don't get talked about of sexual abuse of seniors. Rape. Sexual funding. Some of these do happen in nursing homes because, yeah, we do hire some bad apples there. Exploitation, we'll talk about financial more. We've talked about neglect, isolation, not letting family members visit, not letting them out of the house. Abandonment, we've only had about, in Nevada, 1% of proven cases of abandonment. And that's usually the family's like, I can't take care of them anymore, take them to the emergency room and never come back. And the point there is to bring in services to the family to help them. And then self-neglect, which again, we're all very happy to report that because we're being a good Samaritan. What we're going to look at right now is the relationship between elder abuse and domestic violence. Domestic violence is violence that happens in the family. So the perpetrator can be a spouse, can be a child, can be a grandchild, can be a sibling, can be a parent. They all fall under that same umbrella. And as you see, there's a long intersection. So the Duluth model was made to explain domestic violence to people who have a hard time understanding what that really looks like. What we know is it's about power and control. How do I get power? And how do I keep control of the power? It's not about anything else. It's, can I get power over you? And how do I use that power and control to stay in charge of you? That's in the middle. That's the basis of all of this. And it's the basis of elder abuse in many cases. The outside will, the physical and sexual violence, is the extreme. The stuff that happens in the middle is the common everyday occurrences. The emotional abuse, the intimidation, the blaming, using children, batterers who have families with children, use the children. I'm going to take your children away. I'm going to report you to Child Protective Services, etc. So in 2010, we made a new wheel just for elder abuse because our victims started telling us how different it was. And it wasn't that it's different. It's just the way it's done is different because I don't necessarily need to hit you to keep you under control. What we noticed is the emotional and psychological abuse runs through all the pieces of the puzzle, aren't just one piece of the puzzle. So it's easier to intimidate a senior than it is somebody who may be working and has kids or has outside interests. But for seniors, this is what their abuse wheel looks like. So domestic violence in the elderly look in 4 different categories. Spousal abuse, which grows old, like I said, it's always been there. People ignore it. They call it a dysfunctional marriage, etc. It doesn't go away. It changes because people sometimes are frail. Late onset of spousal abuse is often because of some kind of relationship change. We'll see more of that. New relationships, and then adult child. And these are the types adult child abuse that we find with them. Okay. So signs to watch out for is similar to younger families with domestic violence, withholding money for food and medication, refusing medication when you're ill. I had a client whose husband pushed her out of a moving van, broke her hip, and refused to take her to the hospital for 5 days. She would figure it out on her own. She did eventually leave him. They've been married 49 years. And she did eventually leave, but it took a long time because her kids are like, why didn't you leave before when he was abusing us? So they weren't very helpful for her. But she did eventually, through our services at the shelter, get away and move into an independent living place. Isolation is really big for seniors because they keep your kids away. We've had batterers who don't let their children visit or tell them mom and dad's sleeping or whatever. So kids think that they don't want to see them. We have adult children who keep their grandchildren away. They isolate them. Obviously, humiliating people in public. They still verbally abuse people in public. And one of the things we've learned is that older men have lost their filters. So what they may not have said in public early in their marriage, they're more like they say when people are watching. They lock you in or out of your house. Adult children are really good at this, locking parents in, putting locks where the parents can't reach, like at the top of the door, or changing the locks and not giving them a key so they can't get in. And then they resort, when those don't work, to physical violence. Are you okay? You have a question? Okay. If you get bothered, I am a therapist, so I don't like to see people in distress. So if there's something you need to ask, feel free. Okay, so late onset, we look at new relationships. Most marriages are happy marriages. That's okay. Marriages are happy marriages. So the husband or the spouse, one of them dies, and then the woman generally, since more victims are female, remarries, and he turns out to be a con woman or a sociopath, whatever. But she doesn't know that because she had a happy marriage. And then he takes over her life. I've lost 5 victims to husbands who killed them, second husbands who killed their partners. A lot of them actually broke her neck. We worked so hard to get her out of the relationship, and she went back because he said, I love you. And he went back. Changes in relationship, generally retirement. So if your husband or spouse, whichever wife, was a micromanager at work, when they retire, who do they micromanage now? But it's true. Did anybody see the movie with, Julia Roberts, where her husband went in and rearranged all the cabinets and put them all in order alphabetically? I had a client who did that when he retired. He moved everything up to cabinets she couldn't reach and then put them in alphabetical order. And she couldn't get anything. She couldn't cook. She constantly had to ask him for help. He micromanaged her. And then the other one besides retirement is grandparents are not taking care of grandkids. How many people in here thought in their golden years they'd become a parent again to a grandchild? Anybody? Said, yep, that's my lifelong goal. I want to parent my grandchildren. None of us. I've told mine, don't bring them by. No. My grandchildren are German shepherds. I don't have any grandchildren, they're German shepherds. One's 4 months old. But parenting a teenager when you're in your 70s is very different than parenting teenagers when you're in your 40s. And the world has changed how you parent. So that puts a lot of stress in relationships. So either the child who already has parenting issues becomes abusive, or the spouse becomes abusive because there's this entity in their home they don't understand. And then if there's a physical or mental illness. So mental illness doesn't necessarily get worse as you get older. It can. But your coping skills change. So again, somebody who has a mental illness may become very violent, very aggressive in their older age because they don't have the coping skills they had for it before. And older people take more medication. And so people who are taking medication for mental illness often synergistically work poorly with the other medicines that they're taking for their physical ailments. So it's really important to make sure doctors know all the medications, including the St. John's wort and the Nerviva and everything else you take from over the counter, because they can affect your behavior. Like I said, new relationships, second marriage, new significant others. These are the things we worry about. And my biggest fear is when somebody walks up to me and says, in their 80s, I have a new best friend. And they're new best friends in their 40s. That's a big red flag, always to us. Because what? What do they want from you? Are they really your new best friend? You look at those things. A lot of times they are. They're great. People have old souls at 40. Don't really do well with older people, but then there are the other ones who take over your life, take over your finances, push your family. So those are things we always look for. Rita, on the left, was abused by her adult son. When, just before her husband died, he told her not to allow her son in the house, to put him in, and this is his teenager, to put him in a boys' school. He was so terrified. He did. He got out. She let him back in the house. He has road rage and an anger management issue, which, by the way, is not the cause of domestic violence. Anger management is a separate issue. He chased cars. When they passed him, he didn't like it. He chased them. He chased one into the intersection and almost killed everybody in the car. He got arrested. He tried to appeal his sentence. He got the judge, the Supreme Court judge in California, said he's the poster child for road rage. He lost his license for life. Mom felt bad. She let him move back in. He started abusing her. He convinced her to drive to every neighboring state in California to get a driver's license. Do you think you can if you've already lost yours in California? No, they all talk to each other. No, he can't have a driver's license. Then he started stealing from her and selling her stuff. And finally, a neighbor saw him hit her when he was getting ready to take her to church, and the police were called for the umpteenth time. And this time they said no way. They put him in the police car and he kicked out the windows of the police car. He went to prison for elder abuse and destroying police property. Got a good sentence for that. We worked with her for a year and he got out of jail and she's like, I'm not letting him back. I'm not letting him back. And over the next 2 years, her house was robbed 5 times. They always knew it was him. They just couldn't prove it. Finally, she changed the locks and he broke the windows. After 4 years, she sold her house, beautiful house, and moved into a senior living apartment and didn't tell anybody where she moved, including the priest. So he couldn't find her. These are true stories, but we don't think of them that way. Jane, on the other side, was married for a long time and her husband was always abusive, but she worked forever. And then at 62, she had a stroke and she was home and couldn't do anything. He was an alcoholic. He was very mean. And at night, he would stand in her bedroom in the condo and scream at her starting at 3 o'clock in the morning until the neighbors called the police for worried if somebody was dying. And he would say to the police, oh no, she's got dementia. It's okay, I'll get her calmed down, I'll give her medication. Because of the stroke, she was on 5 or 6 different medications. And he decided which one she should take every day. And I tell her, don't forget to give her them. She'll have another stroke if you don't. Eventually, the police said, we're done. We're not going to keep coming out to this address. And they referred them to Adult Protective Services, who brought me in as a counselor. She eventually left her husband. She's a well-known artist in California. She moved out on her own. When we met her, she could barely sit up straight in a wheelchair. And when she died, she was walking by herself, all by herself, still painting, living in an assisted living apartment. The family invited me to her funeral when she finally passed, and the kids are like, you literally saved her life because we have no idea how bad things will be. Because again, he isolated. Older men are the victims of both domestic violence and elder abuse. 25% of men are the victim of elder abuse. Now, men, you're really cool, and I like you, and I have one at home, and I've had him for 51 years. I'm thinking about keeping him. He's a nice guy. So I pick me up later. Domestic violence. Okay. However, that same macho attitude that gets you through life, I don't feel no pain. I don't need this. I don't have to go to the doctor. By the way, men are living longer, ladies, because women are forcing you to go to the doctors. True stat. True stat. Anyways, they don't want to look weak. That ego stops them from seeking help. And most older men who are abused are more dependent. They may have had a stroke. They may have early onset. They may have onset of dementia. They may just have cognitive deficits, whatever it may be. But because they're more dependent, they don't ask for help. And they're not noticed as much. And in domestic violence, if it's spousal, where will we go? We don't have shelters for men. In Southern California, they have one. Out in Riverside County, one for all the men in Southern California. And who believes them? We all figure that men are bigger, stronger, they can hurt us. But I tell you, and I told Juanita yesterday, a baseball bat is a leveler. It matters who swings it, it does damage. So even if your grandson, who's 11, hits you, and one of the clients I had, her grandson hit her with a phone and knocked her out. It does set. So we have problems with that, and then we have problems with where do we send them for help, because there just aren't a lot of help for men. Okay. So you're saying to yourself now, why don't they leave? Why don't they just get out of these relationships? Well, society doesn't look at relationships between older people, and so they totally ignore domestic violence. When I was hired at Human Options, like I said, I was hired to look at older battered women till we figured out the elder abuse part, and then we were floored. And then we had to figure out how to work with men, and what do we do for men, and how do we help them. But for older women, how do they leave? If you're on Social Security, you're not going back to work. Everybody here said, oh, my golden years, I still want to work. No, I want to retire. I've done it twice. It hasn't taken, but I'm trying. Plus, societally, we've been taught, don't hear our trigger than in public. Now, I taught that to my children. What's said at home stays at home. How many people have taught that to your family? Most of you. You don't talk about what happens outside our home. We're military. We lived on a 3rd floor walk-up. By the time my kids got downstairs to the front on the 1st floor, everybody knew what we talked about at dinner. Kids don't listen. Kids talk. Divorce was never a viable option. In the 2000 censuses, the divorce rate in people over 65 more than doubled. It went from about 10% to 25%, almost 30%. Because older women started realizing that older men are not dying and this is not going to go away. And then it became more acceptable. That's true. That's what they told us in the census. The biggest reason people don't report it, they're afraid of being hit or have reprisal. This is true for kids. How many of your kids have said, I didn't break it, I didn't touch it, I didn't eat it? Why? Because they didn't want to get in trouble. Victims of domestic violence and elder abuse are afraid of the reprisal because that's what's used to keep them in control. They're afraid of losing their independence. Adult children who batter, the first thing they tell them is, I'm going to put you in a nursing home if you don't behave. Yeah. The law doesn't allow that, but they won't know it, neither do you. Your wife cannot put you in a nursing home without your consent. That's the law, because somebody's got to pay for it. If you don't consent, who's going to pay? They're afraid of losing their home, their insurance. Like I said, there used to be the law of abandonment of home, property, health insurance, et cetera, because we need health insurance. We're older and we need it, even with Medicare. There's no affordable housing. When I started doing this, I was in my 40s, and I made a joke one day. I said, I'm going to put myself on the senior low-income housing list because I'm sure I'm going to be low-income still when I get back to that, because I'm a social worker. We don't make a lot of money. There was a 10-year waiting list in 2000. Now the waiting list is even longer, and there's still even less senior apartments because we expected people to die and they're living longer. And yes, you probably heard some candidate tell you that the rate of people dying dropped from the high 70s and low 80s to below, say, 75. That's the length of age. Well, that was only during COVID. It's shot right back up now. COVID was a blimp when we look at how long people are living. And then again, I don't want to be a greeter at Walmart, but if I have no money and somebody takes all my money, what are my options? How do I make my money back? If somebody walks away with all my, it's hard. So let's look at adult children. Everybody assumes adult children are nice and mine are great. Some days. And some days, especially with that new puppy, who wants to come visit me. Anyways, so most of the time they're dependent on the older adult. Most of the time they live in their home or they're dependent on the older adult for their money. They don't have jobs. They have terrible job history. They get fired, they get fired, they get fired. They often live in their parents' home. A lot of them, and most of them do. They don't have a job or they don't have a good record of having a job. They can't keep a job. They get invites to the job. Because of power and control goes through their whole life. They don't want a boss telling them what to do. So they get mad at the boss. Then they come home and blame it on their parents. So we see that a lot. They may have an mental illness, and we know statistically a good portion, and I don't have the current statistics, but it used to be over 50% of adult children who battered had some type of diagnosed or undiagnosed mental illness. Schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, borderline personality, narcissism, so antisocial or psychopathic tendencies. Now, the thing about the last three, the borderline, the narcissist, and the antisocial personality parts, is the hallmark of those are they have no feeling, no empathy for other people. So they don't even recognize what they're doing to you hurts you because it helps them. So it's really hard to treat those people because they never come in for treatment anyways, because they're fine. It would be like if I asked you to wear blue glasses and I had red glasses and you tried to tell me what you saw. I could never understand what you saw because I have blue glasses on. And this is working with people with mental illness. Their brains are different. They don't see the world like the rest of us. So it's really hard for them to understand. So we're always expecting normal reactions from them, from people who are in pain. And they may have a substance abuse problem. And this, obviously, as we all know, is huge. And as parents, we try to figure out what did we do wrong in raising our children. That they have a substance abuse problem, that they have an anger management problem, that they have a problem, period. But the reality is, and I tell this to cops when I train them all the time, once your kid turned 18 and became an adult, all those decisions are theirs. You had nothing to do with it. Society helped them form the rest of those relationships by the people they're hanging out with and the decisions they make. So as a parent, if my kids screw up, I'm not responsible as an adult if they're an adult. So we look at these signs for children who abuse their parents their money. Very often it starts simple. I just learned that cigarettes cost $5 a pack. If you give me $5 for cigarettes, I won't ask you for anything else. If you lend me your car keys and give me gas money, I won't bother you. You know what? Just give me your car. You don't drive it anymore anyways. Why don't you put me on your checking account? That way I won't have to keep asking you for money. These are true stories. The kids do this all the time. And the problem with putting your kids on your checking account is the bank has no idea who owns that money in there. As far as they're concerned, it's anybody fair game who's on the bank account. So they can take your money, and they do. They humiliate their parents in public or private. They do it really well in doctor's offices because they go with, they're afraid the parents are going to say what's happening to them. And so they really don't let their parents talk in the appointment. They take over the appointment and then they'll tell them, oh, you know, she's losing her memory. She can't remember what she ate this morning. Oh, he's getting really clumsy. He fell down. That's how he got bruised. And so they lock their parents in and out of the house, or they lock them in the house, like I said, with a lock at the top of the door where they can't get out or can't get in, whatever the case may be. And then the same thing we see with physical violence across the spectrum in domestic violence, same type of behaviors. A lot of them like to think that they're caregivers. How many in here know somebody whose adult child is caring for a friend? Some of you may. But they don't provide what people need. They take the money and they don't give them food, or they don't take them to the doctors, or they don't buy them clean clothes, or they don't replace their glasses, or they take their hearing aids and break them and don't replace them because if they can't hear you, then you don't have to deal with them. They don't take them to doctor's appointments. My mother's doctor was one of my really good friends in elder abuse. And we went to her appointment and the doctor said, okay, Carol. And I was like, you're what? I said, it's time for me to leave. So I get out because she's going to do her screening for elder abuse. I'm fine with that because I know I'm not abusing her. When I get back in, my mother says to me, do you know what she asked me? I'm like, yeah, she asked me if I hit you, if I yell at you. No, she asked me if I'm having safe sex. My mother was 82. I looked at my mother and said, do not answer that question for me. I don't want to know. In my life, you had sex twice, my sister and my brother. That's all I know, and that's all I want to know. But if your adult children never leave the room, how can the doctor screen you? And they don't tell you the truth. I never wanted my mom to feel infantilized. So when I take her to the doctor in her 80s, they used to put a sticky note on the front of the chart with the things that I was concerned about. Never sent them to the doctor, just let the doctor know what my concerns were. Because she's an adult. She still had all her mental faculties. However, she was having some issues. Adult children who act as caregivers don't let family help. I can do it by myself. It's okay. I don't need your help. Family often put the person least likely to care for a parent in charge of caring for the parent. Oh, Bill doesn't work, and he's clean and sober now, or he has been for a couple of weeks. Well, let him take care of him. Yeah, I had a guy whose family did that. There were 11 siblings, okay? And they picked the youngest because he didn't work. He used to have a drug problem. And at night he would sit on the bed and sharpen his machete and tell his mother one day he will die. And she was bedbound. She couldn't get up. When the police finally kicked him out of the house, they found 25 knives shoved up in the walls. And the family went, oh, we didn't know he was that bad. But they didn't come visit because he was taking care of mom. It can involve sexual rape, sexual assault. We had a huge case in Florida where a grandson and granddaughter moved in and he raped his grandmother. The family sided with the son, saying she must have caused it. She was in her 90s. And while she was in the hospital recovering from the beating and the sexual assault, the family went in and sold everything. And when they went to court, the grandson's family all sat on his side of the courtroom. And there was nobody on Miss Mary's side except for the advocates. Now, these are extreme cases, but they're real. And it's not caregiver stress. These people who are doing the caregiving are not necessarily stressed. And I will not negate caregiver stress. It's a real thing. When I took care of my mom before she died, I'd get stressed sometimes because I knew she was dying. And instead of yelling and screaming at her, I went out and swapped laps in the pool. Or walked around in circles in the garage to get rid of my stress. But I never once touched my mother, and I never yelled at her. Because I know what to do for caregiver stress. And granted, a lot of people don't. These two ladies are both taken care of by their adult sons. Lola was in a wheelchair when her husband died of a heart attack. Her son, who was already living in the house, took over. They took the ramp out so she couldn't get outside. So she couldn't get out the front door. He did leave the backyard one because she was bargaining. He spent all her money. He would hit her. He wouldn't feed her. Again, she was in a wheelchair, so she had trouble reaching high things up. He'd go away for days at a time, leaving her home alone. Ruth's husband died unexpectedly while she was in the hospital having surgery on her neck. When she came home, her older son was still living with them. And after they had the funeral for her husband, he put his hands on her shoulders and said, I can break your neck just like this and you can join Dad. He beat her up on a regular basis. He relegated her to her bedroom, a little sitting room and a kitchen. He took over the rest of the house. Eventually, we worked with Ruth for 2.5 years and she got a restraining order against her son, which is really hard to do because you love your kids. And she finally left one night when he tried to kill her dog because the dog meant more to her than her own personal safety. He did get kicked out. He ended up back in prison for abusing her. But she loves her son. And we love our kids. So what we've learned from the victims of what they want is they want the violence to stop. They want it to stop. Just make it stop. They want help for their adult child or their spouse. And there are programs out there that they can attend to get help. The problem is they have substance abuse problems and they may have mental illness, so they don't want helping. And we can't force them because they're consenting adults. They have all of their faculties. Parents don't want to be seen as a bad parent. Like I said, it's not their fault, but we have to teach them that. And then they want somebody to listen non-judgmentally. And this is true for domestic violence victims, regardless of age. Most people, when they tell you their spouse is abusing them, they go, well, you should leave. Or maybe you should get dinner on the table at time. Or maybe you should talk nicer to them. Or in the case of the Catholic Church used to say, one of our priests in town used to say, it's your job to be a better wife. So you put all the blame back on the victim. What they really want, they do want the police to arrest them. They just don't want anyone to make a phone call because they know about retaliation and they're afraid about being retaliated against. They want the adult child to be held accountable. Whether it's stealing their money or in some cases, stealing their homes, they want them to be held accountable. And they want to understand the system. Who's APS? What do they do? What's conservatorship? What's guardianship? What's all these big words that we throw out at people? And I was talking with somebody earlier about your guardianship problem that you hear here in Nevada. Only 1% of guardians, people are under guardianship across the United States. You guys had some bad apples. And hopefully we'll get it fixed. Because I've worked with public guardians and I've worked with judges and I've worked with conservators. And on the whole, most of them are pretty good. There are bad apples. Hey, because like I said, they're psychopaths, they're narcissists, they're antisocial, they're borderline. They don't see what they do is hurting you. They're only looking at getting their needs met. Okay, so caregiver stress. This is a big thing. In the 80s, there was a study done in England by a social worker who wanted to know why her grandmother was being hurt in a nursing home. So she came up with her thesis. If you know how to do a research study, come up with an idea you want to research. So she automatically assumed it's because they were short-staffed. They were short-staffed, so that's why people were being abused. She proved her thesis. However, since the 80s, we have not been able to replicate that study, not once. So for those of you who are in research or anything about research, if you can't replicate a study, there's a problem with the study. And it turned out there was a problem with her study. And we now know that elder abuse is not caused by caregiver stress. Like I said, as a stressed caregiver, I knew how to handle it. Violence is not caused by stress. It's caused by aggression. And frustration can lead to more aggression. It's a learned behavior. If you've watched parents hit their kids when they're stressed and when they're frustrated or when they're aggressive, you learn that behavior. So violence is a learned behavior. A lot of people never hit. I didn't hit my kids. I hit them once. And then I felt bad and I never hit them again. We tend to focus on the caregiving. Oh, are you getting enough to eat? Are you doing this? Are you getting your baths? Should we bring more services in the house to help you? Rather than the abuse. She's a handful. They're a dysfunctional family. Now we're putting the blame back on the victim. It says that their dependency is the cause of the problem. Well, if it wasn't the cause of the problem when they were abusing them before they got dependent, why is it now all of a sudden the cause of the problem? Because it doesn't just happen overnight. It's gradual. Does anybody here know the story about the frog in hot water? Yeah? Okay, so for those of you who don't, if you put a frog in a boiling pot of hot water, he will jump out. It's hot, right? Think about putting yourself in a hot bathtub. You get out. But if you sit a frog in a pot of cold water and turn the heat up, he will boil to death because he gets adjusted to the temperature and he doesn't realize he needs to get out. Okay? That's victims. It's so insidious that they don't realize what's happening to them in many cases. Or then when they do, they don't know how to get out. Abuse between spouses and partners may have been early in the relationship for years, and then, like I said, retirement can exacerbate it. Oops. So here's the way I like to think about spousal abuse. How many of you know SpongeBob SquarePants? SpongeBob SquarePants, right? So when we go out to homes to bring in extra assistance to the homes, think of SpongeBob. SpongeBob sucks up everything, right? So when a caregiver is truly stressed, because it's stressful, if they're truly stressed, they become SpongeBob. Give more services, more services, more services, more services. And when we go back to check the services in 90 days, they're still there and they're going, give me more services. They're a little sponge. But for those who are abusive, they go, give me more services. And then we bring them in the house, and we get them set up, and in 90 days, they're gone. And the perpetrator of the abuse is alone with the victim again. Oh, she was stealing from us. Oh, we didn't like the way she looked at us. She ate all our food. They'll come up with annoying reasons for getting rid of the care assistance. So if you don't remember anything else about caregiver stress, remember SpongeBob. Okay. Okay. We're gonna watch this video.
It was the first time that I hit my mom. I wish I would have told someone sooner. We kind of.
Nancy Hansen lived together with her mother for most of her life.
I mean, we had wonderful times together. We were close, we enjoyed the same things, and we were a team.
Long before she died, Nancy's mother became her caregiver. Nancy's life would never be the same.
The doctor told me that she would need 24-hour care. Oh yeah, I can do it, you know, and we had bedpan, we had washcloths and everything, and they said that they would send out nurses' aides. I wasn't too bad then. I thought I was doing pretty well. And, but as that time went on, I began to deteriorate. I deteriorated because when I would once get awake and the incontinence, both bowel and urinary, was getting ahead of me, I could not get back to sleep. And I started doing laundry at night and stuff, and we'd get her all cleaned up. Sometimes my husband and I would just have to stick her in the bathtub because my husband had ringed up a bell where she could just press it, but she would press it after she was through with everything. So it was just a constant routine. It was like a squirrel's cage for me. I began having very suspicious, angry feelings that my mom was maybe doing some of this stuff on purpose. And that was my first very clear warning, because I lost this. I was beginning to expect normal reactions from someone who was no longer normal. And it got to the point where she didn't any longer want me to take care of her because I was beginning the psychological abuse. The things I said to her were unforgivable. I told her that her brain was like a sieve that she couldn't remember. And I said, if you don't stop messing up, we're going to stick you in a nursing home. Or Mom, I'm thinking very seriously about making you lie in it. And I know that you're not going to like that at all. and she would cry and she would say, honey, I don't do it on purpose. And I'd say, get real. I will never, ever forget the first time that I hit my mom. I was totally losing control. I am a very organized person. I was becoming very angry that I could no longer organize. She would be so slow in getting her clothes on, and then she wanted her makeup put on. And she wasn't always maybe cooperating with me while I was putting on her makeup. And sometimes I would take her face in my hands and I was entirely too rough. And I'd say, put your head up. I can't, the light, it's dark, Mom, or whatever. I don't see well enough to put your makeup on. I didn't belt down a few straight Jack Daniels and then start in on my mom. And I was always careful never to use my fist. Never. I could possibly have killed her because I was so angry. And I have very strong hands. And I had to be careful. There was always, to a certain extent, I know now that I was always bottled. I never really did everything that I could have done. There, even when I see that now with the passage of time, there was always a little control. But then sometimes after the makeup ordeal was over, I would shake her. I would say, will you please? Mom, I can't stand much more of this. And I would shake her. And then we'd lose more time because then she'd have to sit down and she'd say, you're hurting me. You're hurting my neck. And little did I know, I could have caused another stroke by doing that. I made sure that when I hit her with the flat of my hand so that there wouldn't be any bruises. When I would have to take her to the doctor, I was sometimes scared because I would hit her in the back. And I thought, what if he sees some bruises? My God, what am I going to do? I was afraid of prosecution. I was afraid of maybe I'm losing it. And what if they put me in, what if I really do go off the beam? And then my mom and my husband are left. The two people I love the most. How can I do this? And I'm being buried. I can't get out. And I can't go on. I can't go forward. I can't do anything. All I can do is kill myself. Then you're really going to wimp out, right? Where the hell was I going to go? We who abuse hide it. We're the biggest actors and the biggest hiders in all the world.
So let's talk about financial exploitation. Everybody in this room is most worried about losing their money, right? We're worried about losing our money. I worked hard for my money. I don't want to give it away. That's for sure. And it stands for, we'll get it back up there, the illegal or improper use of an older adult's assets or property or funds. And a lot of older adults do not use banks, so they have a lot of money in their house, or they have jewelry, they don't use safe deposit boxes, etc. It depends on when they were brought up, whether or not whether they trust banks. So there's a lot of people who have cash laying around their house. But let's talk about the ones that we're the most afraid of, are the scams. But what we need to do is worry about who's doing it. And most of it is partners, whether they're married or not, family members, and trusted individuals. The bottom ones, not so much. Although we do see a lot of it in the faith community now, with people trying to get their money. There are a lot of unscrupulous churches out there. So the methods are scams and identity theft. Identity theft is something we're all worried about. Somebody stealing our stuff, and that's usually a stranger. Theft, coercion, and fraud, online scams. Undue influence, and that's the worst part because it's usually somebody in a position of trust, which is a family member, a good friend, even a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, who then goes after your money by convincing you they're doing what's in your best interest. And then the abuse of legal authority by using powers of attorney to take your stuff. And a lot of times adult children will get parents to sign powers of attorney over and over without ever realizing that they're giving away their power. So the undue influence means that they're taking away your ability to consent. You don't know where they're going to use your money or what they're going to do with it. They put their will in place of your will. And they may not be in your best interest. So that's what happens with undue influence. And we see a lot of these cases for undue influence. And that's where we start worrying about my new best friend. Because a lot of them come in and use undue influence. Let me just help you. I'll take you to the bank. Give me your PIN. I'm going to get it. You don't have to get out of the car. Susie would never hurt me, but she just emptied your bank account. Consent means that you have enough wherewithal to understand what's going on and you can consent to it. So if somebody has mild cognitive impairment, they probably still have consent. They have dementia, some form of dementia, Alzheimer's, frontotemporal, or whatever, they may not be able to consent. So there's a big difference. And the only way to determine if somebody has the ability to consent is to actually have them tested by a neuropsychologist. We're talking about hours-long testing, not just a short little 10-question dream. And it means you're acting freely and voluntarily, not being forced. So these are some of the examples of what we see as far as financial elder abuse. Sweetheart scams, anybody know anybody? So one of my friends, one of my brother-in-law's renters, he rents her own to an older woman. She just got taken advantage of a sweetheart scam for $10,000. She met this guy online. He convinced her he loved her. Then he fell and hurt his leg and he had no insurance. So she sent him her life savings. After she made money back, her grandson came and told her he needed money for his car insurance and took that. Other online scams are the prince from Nigeria who sends you the letter that says you can have $1 million if you send me, $100,000. And then grandparent schemes. Anybody know anybody a victim of a grandparent scam? These are going rampant and they're getting worse because your grandson or granddaughter says, I'm in Mexico and the police arrested me because I peed on the street. Now, my first thing would be, my grandchildren don't pee on the street. And it happened to my father-in-law's girlfriend, and she was ready to send the money down for her nephew, her grandson. My father-in-law said, this sounds like something Carol told us not to do. So he called his daughter. She called her daughter and asked if her son was there, her grandson was there. She said, yeah, he's asleep in his bed. So she had told the people to call back in 20 minutes. And when they call back, they go, yeah, we talked to him, he's fine. Don't call again. One of the tip-offs is they will ask you for gift cards. They don't want cash, they want gift cards. Somebody asks you to pay in gift cards, whether they tell you it's the IRS or a scammer, it's a scam. Canadian lottery, anybody familiar with the Canadian lottery scam? You can't play the Canadian lottery. You are not, unless you are a Canadian citizen. And they don't ask you for the taxes up front. They do just like ours do. They take it out and send you the rest. It's a scam. Telemarketing scams, identity theft scams, power of attorney, these are all frauds that people do. I've had people, and these are unscrupulous caregivers who go, my car broke, if you buy me a new car, you won't have to pay me for the next 6 months or whatever. Well, the car cost $30,000. She didn't make that in 6 months. Just to give over their property or coerce them in changing their estate planning documents. The state of California changed the law that if the current trustees of the estate is changed by anybody, the current trustee has to be noticed before that new estate can go into effect. Okay, I'm running out of time. Home improvement schemes, you hear about those all the time. These are some of the red flags we look at, especially when there's no money coming in the account or money's being transferred. The research says that if we teach people safety planning, how to protect themselves, and provide legal advocacy, victims will get help. And then we focus on the victim safety, physical and psychological, within home counseling, support groups, emergency shelter, and transitional housing. These things are proven to work. And although they're not in every state or every county, there are a lot of them across the United States. And this, okay, can we play the YouTube video? This is about, there's a little YouTube video. This is Clark County Adult Protective Services. This is where you would call. It's a anonymous line because you're not a mandated reporter. And you could just say, I'm worried about my neighbor. Can you send somebody out to do a welfare check? They don't tell them your name, so you don't have to worry about that. And they'll send a social worker out. Now, if the person is cognitively intact, they have the right to say no. But if they're not, they may go back with the police to do a wellness check or whatever. But that's fun, and we'll see the video.
Unseen, unreported, and ignored. The abuse of vulnerable adults affects more people than you realize. Abandonment, abuse, neglect, exploitation, isolation. What you don't see hurts more. What they experience hurts every day. What they need is a voice. What they need is you. Help stop the abuse of vulnerable adults. Visit nevada211.org/APS or call 888-729-0571.